Welcome to Dollcast with Kelly Cadigan.
I know you guys are going to tell me I'm crazy, but I think all gay men would benefit from a gender transition.
Brianna Wu.
Do you know who Brianna Wu is?
It was people online.
I just asked you about Brianna Wu. So
I don't remember who she is now.
Schyler Bogert.
More confused on girls or boys would be a better fit for me. And when you're bisexual and you have the potential for either, you got to parse that out a little bit.
And TafTaj.
Having your story heard, having people empathize with you on that kind of political level, I think is really hard to do.
It's the Dollcast. Mostly normal women.
Hello, and welcome back to Dollcast, where real talk meets a touch of glam and plenty of laughs. I'm your host, Schyler, and we have an absolutely stacked episode today with some fierce topics and even fiercer opinions. But first, let me introduce the brilliant and ever-entertaining crew who make every episode sparkle. So, first up, we have the wise and mystical muse herself, TafTaj. Seriously, if wisdom had fragrance, she'd be the luxury perfume you wish you could afford. Welcome, Taf.
Thank you, Schyler. I'm excited to be here.
And so next up, we have the fun and eloquent Brianna Wu, a woman of many talents. She can win a debate and plan a Mario Kart strategy all in one breath. How's it going, Bri?
You know, the most embarrassing thing that ever happened to me is my niece completely destroyed me at Christmas last year at Mario Kart. And I'm just like, bitch, I have been playing this game since 1994 and you're coming in here and beating me? How dare you? Thank you very much. I appreciate that, Sky.
Ouch, a wound to the pride. I'm sorry, Bri. All right, and last but definitely not least, the spicy original homegirl herself, Kelly Cadigan. Known for bringing the drama and, well, spilling the tea, she keeps us on our toes and ready for the next plot twist. Kelly, are you ready to stir the pot today?
Oh my God, always. I'm so excited.
All right, so kicking off today's episode, we have our very first guest on the show, the iconic plastic martyr. You might know her from her viral videos where she shares her life and throws in some spicy commentary. But with the election on the horizon, today we're going to be talking politics, plastic's unapologetic advocacy, and why she feels so passionately about these issues. Plastic, welcome to Dollcast.
Thank you for having me.
Awesome.
Amazing.
So,
welcome.
Tell us a little bit more about yourself and what you love to share on your socials.
Well, I am in the entertainment industry. I began as a fashion model when I was like 14 and then slowly moved into reality TV. I also do music. And through that journey, I also had to navigate that as an openly trans woman. And that was really interesting because you would think Hollywood was this open-minded place, but it was very judgmental against trans people, trans women specifically. I was fired left and right from runway shows and music videos, find out I was trans, and it was just really interesting to navigate both things. The entertainment industry is really, really difficult to manage for anybody.
Yeah.
Add on top of that, being a marginalized person, it's really interesting. So I kind of started doing more content talking about that. And then around 2016, when trans rights was starting to be more villainized and politicized by the far right, I began to push back on that and start to give my opinion on, and as an actual trans person, how transitioning young and being seen by my family saved my life rather than hurt me.
They invited me onto two separate major reality shows in the Gamergate era, and I said no to them. Like, I looked at it, and I'm like, I know this trick. They're going to set me up to be the villain, and I don't know. So I am not surprised that happened to you. I was watching them after they finally came out, and I was like, oh my God, I'm so glad I said no to both of these. So I wanted to talk. The whole reason I wanted to bring you on the show today is, there's an election, and I love love your Kamala content. You're always out there. You're a cheerleader for my girl, Kamala Harris, who I've worked with a ton in the last 4 years, her office on women's initiatives, really stuff, like really impressive stuff. And, I criticized her quite a bit in the 2020 primary. She was absolutely not my candidate. I was 100% in on Elizabeth Warren. So she had a lot of work to do to impress me. Her office did. And it's not like this is the first politician I've ever worked with. I walked away so impressed with how professional and thoughtful and most of all strategic that they were. So I thought what I wanted to do today was, I know there's a little bit of a different opinion here at the Dollcast who we're all voting for. I was thinking we would kind of all just talk as a group, figure out kind of what's at stake with the election.
Who wants to go first?
Oh boy. Yeah.
I want to hear why, because I don't want to call you out, but I know you're leaning towards Trump. So over Kamala, if you don't mind me asking.
Oh gosh. Wait, you're putting me on the spot first.
No. It is hard to go first, especially if you've got the dissenting opinion.
Yeah. Oh, but okay. I appreciate those assurances. I feel like I'm about to be excommunicated from this group.
Really no.
Okay. Well, for me, it's a lot of it is from I feel like trans rights. I liked the movement back in the mid 2010s, back when it was first fresh and it was inspirational and it was really it seemed like the direction progressivism was going and it seemed like the right way. But I think things came to a front for me when I saw the Title IX legislation coming through with Biden and Harris going for that and trying to codify gender identity into law. And I'm okay, I see the value in protecting vulnerable people like ourselves, but there's going to be bad actors and people that abuse that. And it strips away the ability to actually treat them in the way that they should be treated. I mean, there's lots of cases of this kind of thing internationally. And I'm just kind of scared for what that could do long term for trans rights if the impression of what trans means in the public eye goes downhill because of all these bad actors like predators and etc. that are coming into the trans community because there's benefits legally. I don't know.
Okay.
So I'm worried.
I have so many thoughts on that, right? Because I think this election is really kind of a referendum on progressivism and a certain kind of identity progressivism, which is very focused on these marginalized groups and creating protections for them. And besides you, Schyler, I'm probably the most maybe Trump leaning or right person on here. And my biggest concern with Trump is just the election stuff and the sort of instability that causes. But I empathize a lot with your feelings of kind of anxiety around the progressive push for defending trans rights. It's not how I would do it. I think that we need an approach which defends our rights on the basis of freedom and free expression. I think that is so much more robust. And I really do see how when we've kind of barged into spaces and insisted that people, view us a certain way, sometimes it's backfired. And we've seen this big push where people are really frustrated with that. So I relate, I empathize.
So I just want to jump in and say, look, I totally understand where both of you are coming from. I really do. So as someone who regularly writes checks to the Democratic Party, raises money professionally for the Democratic Party, works with the Democratic Party on a host of elections, I cannot stress to you just how little they understand or care about us. They're completely tuned out to the average Democrat. I swear to God, before I write them a check, I will get the candidate on the phone and I will say, this is something I always do. I go, what is in your mind the most important, public policy for trans people? And they will always give me something completely stupid, like non-binary driver's licenses, or, it's not healthcare funding. It's like something that's very superficial. Like I had a major candidate, I'm not going to tell you their name, but this is as high up as it gets in the government. And they told me that like they helped change a form in their state to make it so you didn't have to declare your gender on it. And it's like, dude, I want healthcare funding. So I hear what you're saying. I really think you should attribute all of this in the Democratic Party not to them subscribing to this maximalist opinion on things like Title IX, which I also share your reservations about. And I'm telling you, after the Republicans have made them pay such a high price for standing with the trans community this time around, it is not going to be the same if Kamala comes into office. So, in my view, I think it's okay to look at the bigger things like, is democracy going to be okay? What is the economy going to be like? What is our national security going to be like? And as someone who's taken a very public stand with Israel, it gives me a lot of pause that Rex Tillerson, quit as Secretary of State midway through. I didn't love the guy, but he was eminently qualified. So many of Trump's generals have quit halfway through. And we are seriously looking at a hot war with Taiwan, in the next 5 years, over Taiwan, rather. So, I think if you really look at this from 30,000 feet up, I understand where you're coming from. It's just not, I don't think it's going to be as big an issue, in my opinion.
Can I ask you a question, Brianna?
Sure, of course.
If you're seriously looking at a hot war with Taiwan pretty soon here, is there any desire to move manufacturing at home? Right now, a ton of that is offshored, especially into places where China has access in China. It seems like, one way to interpret Trump's protectionism is really as an anticipation of geopolitical conflict and a desire to make sure that we have domestic manufacturing.
Yeah, 100%. I'm very aligned with you on that, which is why I was so upset that Mike Johnson, literally yesterday, as we're recording this, the Republican Speaker in the House said he was going to repeal the CHIPS Act. And we can get into the CHIPS Act and, tooling and all of that. I understand it's not a perfect legislation, but this was trying to get something that's very much in our national security interest back here at home, because, we can't have a military if we can't have chips to operate it. So I really share that. And a lot of Trump's domestic agenda is someone that actually ran for Congress here in Massachusetts. I've talked to these union guys that want jobs back here, at home. So I'm sympathetic to that. I think the question is not the policy I have a difference with. It's more, is Trump the vehicle to get us there? And I just don't have faith in that credibility.
Well, I'd love to talk more about that too, the personality aspect. But like plastic, what do you think of all this?
Let's pivot. Yeah.
Ooh, well, as a Jew and a trans woman, I think Trump is extremely dangerous. He is just come out. He is not hiding it. He is full front and center what he wants to do, how he wants to destroy this democracy, how he wants to make this a white Christian nationalist country. And I'm sorry, anybody who is okay with that or supports that, in my eyes, you're batshit crazy. Literally, we have
except Sky.
History. Read the history books. If you sit by and allow this to happen again, you are part of this problem. And he is not hiding it. So as for trans rights, I had this issue with a bunch of these progressive trans women who are like, oh, Kamala isn't doing enough or isn't saying enough. And it's like, girl, she shouldn't be saying this right now before the election. Democrats are extremely transphobic too. And we are so far down on the list. And I wouldn't want us to be at the top of the list. Trans rights should not be the number one thing that America is talking about right now. I think we deserve human rights. I think we need to put checks and balances into place because, like some of you said, there are people who are abusing the power of this. But I don't think that trans women should not be considered women. And I don't think that we should invalidate people's identity and invalidate people's personalities simply because you don't agree with it. I think there needs to be checks and balances, but I think segregating trans people from cisgender people is extremely wrong, and it's going to lead us down a road where it opens it up for more bigotry and more segregation. And we are just the tipping point of that. So I think that it's really, really important to bite the bullet. And whether you like Kamala or not, at least in 4 years, there will be another election. Trump is literally saying many times that day one, he will be a dictator. So if you want to live under a dictatorship, which is really actually under Putin, that's on you. But, you make bed, you lie in it, and you're going to be lying in it for a while.
Kelly, kind of how do you feel about this? I was really, I was pleased, but you came out really strongly for Kamala as well when she was kind of the nominee.
Yeah, and I agree with absolutely everything that Plastic just said. Back to Sky's point where she was focusing on, the people that are abusing the trans community to do predatory things, such as like all the stories we've seen of people going to female prisons that are identifying as trans. And then we have all these cases of assault. I do think we need to have stricter checks and balances in place. And I don't blame her for how she phrased that in that interview. But like Plastic was saying, I really think we need checks and balances. And I know this is really controversial in the trans community, but I think a huge part of that is trans medicalism and saying that HRT is a requirement for an extended period of time, at least before you can have access to female spaces, such as female prisons. And I think that would prevent a lot of these assaults that are taking place.
Yeah, I think that's really fair. I think it's really interesting. We've got 5 trans women here today, and all of us, if I'm understanding everyone right, like all 5 of us agree that this maximalist view on trans issues, this isn't what we want from the Democratic Party. Does that sum up how all of us are feeling today? Yeah,
Definitely.
Yeah. What about you, Sky? How do you kind of?
Yeah. I just think as much as I would like to believe that we could make policy on gender identity, when I look at the real world examples, I just don't see it being tenable. It's maybe that's distortion from the media. I think any case where there's a bad acting trans woman, or in some cases, better described crossdresser acting out that's getting called trans and then causing problems. You have the Sal Grover case thing that's happening in Australia. That's just awful. But it's not the US. But the point is that that kind of thing is just one step away if we're pushing gender identity in law. Yeah. And it's I don't know what the right approach is. I don't have the magic ingredient, but you can't enforce passing in terms of there's trans women that are a lot like women. And then there are some that just, well, for better words, aren't necessarily. Yeah. And it's I feel like it's part of the right vision is to understand that there's people that aren't going to accept that. And I'm worried that if we continue the progressive push that honestly, Biden, Kamala, I'll be honest, I voted Biden last election. And it's only because I'm afraid of the events that have sort of taken place. You have the Leah Thomas thing at the Olympics, and it's I don't see anything harming trans rights. No offense to him, no offense to her, than that. And seriously, because now you have Riley Gaines doing this whole thing, and it's a whole career off of sports stuff now. That's, it's just, how can we stop that?
What I find really frustrating is, I'm a little older than y'all are. In the trans movement, how we got all these rights was going very slowly, piece by piece, and getting buy-in from the wider public. Something I tweeted out last week was a copy of my Virginia birth certificate, which has been changed after I got GRS to female, right? That is an accommodation that was put into law. It took time. There was buy-in from the public. What I think has happened in the last 5 years is a lot of the trans activists have convinced Democratic lawmakers of this maximalist vision of trans liberation that essentially comes to, it's a bunch of policy positions that turn the public against us. I think prisons are a really, really good example. I don't think prisons should be gender affirming. I also don't think someone like, my friend, Chelsea Manning, who was basically kept in prison and tortured without HRT and without help for that gender dysphoria, that's also not the right policy. So I don't know if we need to create a separate, prison for trans people in the United States or what. But, this maximalist idea, I think it's not serving us because it just hands the Republicans all the tools they need to create millions of dollars of ads going after us. So Plastic, when you said, you think they're talking about trans stuff way too much, I really strongly agree with you. I want trans people to be a lot less visible, and I want us just to be able to go about our lives kind of quietly in the background.
Yeah, when I transitioned, I began my transition at 5 years old, and it was
You're so lucky.
I was very lucky, and
I definitely want to hear about that as well.
Yeah.
So I'm 35 now, so I began, 30 years ago. And my mom is a liberal Jew from New York. She's got 2 masters in psychology, and she knew,
educated.
Yeah, she knew what was happening. This wasn't pushed on me. This wasn't that's why the whole narrative of, you're teaching kids, and nobody I didn't even know what that was. I didn't know the word transgender until I was 16. All I knew was I was a girl. And I had to do whatever I had to do to make myself not want to kill myself. Because I remember the first time I wanted to kill myself, I was 6 years old. And it wasn't because I was depressed or I learned about reincarnation in school, and I was like, oh my God, that's it. That's how I'm going to get in the right body.
I remember that. I did the same thing.
Yeah,
Yes.
I tried to kill myself at
Same
6
thing.
because I was like, I'm going to come back in the right body this time.
Yeah.
And thank God I didn't successfully do it. It's way harder to drown yourself at 6 years old than you think. But anyway, so my mom luckily saw me and knew that it was at that point called gender dysphoria or whatever the hell it was called. And she allowed me to socially transition. And then when I was in my late teens, I began my hormone replacement therapy journey. And then in my 20s is when I got my surgery. And all of that just, it's what kept me alive. And my mom fought for me every single day because when I was doing this years ago, there was nobody else out there. There was no internet for us to get information from. So when, I would go into the bathrooms, the girls' bathrooms, and then the parents would complain. And then the school would tell me I can't go in the girls' bathroom. My mom was there fighting for me. And she was like, either you're going to let my kid use the correct bathroom that aligns with her gender, or I'm going to have a news crew here tomorrow. And your choice. And
oh my goodness. I love this.
The transphobia that I experience now is worse than anything I've ever experienced
100%.
in the years before.
Yes.
And you would think it was the opposite because there's so much more information now. But I guess ignorance is bliss. And I would love to go back to a time when people just either didn't give a shit or were more afraid of me than they wanted to hurt me, because now they want to hurt me rather than be afraid of me.
Totally. And I feel like that's something that we can all relate to on some level. I'm lucky in that, like, my parents also fought for me in a lot of ways. Like, I remember, one of my extended family members like misgendered me, and my father was like so annoyed, and he was like, yeah, she just doesn't get it. And he was like ranting. And like, I had not asked him to do that, but he so clearly loved me so deeply and understood my struggle. Yeah. So touching. And I feel like what I'm hearing from like everyone, even though people are maybe disagreeing, is that we're all united about wanting a better world for people like us.
Yes.
And I'm so frustrated sometimes when, I look out into the internet space and I see that people who are, maybe a little bit like transcritical or not progressive, I see them like selling out to conservatives and to gender critical people, because it's so easy to do that. It's so easy to just be like, I have a slightly different opinion. These people will give me attention for that opinion. I'm just going to get like, I'm just going to take advantage of that. But at the end of the day, like you and I, Schyler, and you, Plastic, like we all just want the best for us.
Yeah.
And
we all have a united target on our back is the thing. So like, difference of opinion on political people or not, we still have that same target on our back.
It's so important to remember that.
Yeah. No, I wanted to ask, have y'all seen that trans ad that is playing? I live in Massachusetts, and it is on the air every 4 seconds. I was walking out of the bathroom at the movie theater the other day, and this ad comes on the air, and it's got like a trans woman with a very deep voice, and then it shows, Rachel Levine, and then it shows a bunch of drag queens. And then it goes into, Kamala Harris wants gender affirming surgery for prisoners. And then, it ends with the tagline, like, Trump is for us, Kamala is for they, them. And, it's not that I think all of us just said, like, we want a more sophisticated conversation about how trans people are treated in prison. I certainly do not want, cis women in danger because the prison system is putting, rapists in with, cis women. That's cruel and crazy. We all condemn unequivocally. But at the same time, that's not what this ad is. It's using these caricatures of trans women as drag queens, and then using us to scare the public, and then linking like a bunch of ideas together, like drag queens, trans women, non-binary people into the soup to basically make people hate us. And it's a really dispiriting thing to see an election about, like dehumanizing you. Do y'all feel the same way?
Totally. Yeah. It's taking that exaggerated bad examples. I mean, this started with like the drag queen story hour. That's what's fuming that whole ad, is like with the drag queen part. And it's like, drag queens have been around forever, but it wasn't until the schools and the drag queen story hour time that this whole thing started to become an issue. Like, you have a whole publication, like now, is it called Redux, that goes and just publishes like anti-trans content all the time. And like, but rightfully, I mean, I'll be honest, like, they're taking examples, real world examples, and just reporting on them. So the problem is with the legal system, the framework that's allowing these, again, you know, I don't want to say they're not genuine trans women, but there's clearly problems going on with these people. And it's like, they're getting wrapped up though, and they're basically dragging the whole thing down. And it's like, how can we move forward in a way that protects the image of like the trans community and keeps those rights and keeps the public image like going up? Like, Brie, I always think back to how you always talk, because you transitioned so long ago, how like you saw the evolution in rights like over time. And like, I go back to that and I'm like, we take it for granted. Like, I take it for granted. I had everything paid for through insurance because of people like you that came before and spoke to the efficacy of this process. And like, before now, we're starting to see pushback, and now we see ads, literally political ads attacking us. Like, I don't know.
It's exhausting. It really hurts me. I mean, Kelly, how do you feel about it?
I mean, it's always been tough. I feel like the right has just been getting more and more against us as this election has been getting closer. It just feels like I didn't think it could get worse from 2018. And now it just feels like we're here and it's even worse than it was. I remember in like 2016, it felt like things were kind of taking a turn, especially when Caitlyn Jenner came out. Like, I thought like society was going to be with us. And I don't know, it seems like ever since Trump got into office, it's gotten worse and worse. And now I don't know if we're getting more accepted by society anymore. I think there's more people against us than ever before, especially because we've been so exposed by the trans visibility movement.
I think it's a real problem. I hope this is an unpopular opinion, but I think that trans people, because we don't have children, I think we're really underestimating the degree to which it's upsetting parents, like this explosion of very young children that are non-binary. I've got a really good friend of mine. He was telling me with the class, they were having a coming out day, and like half the class was raising their hand, not saying, "Hi, I'm gay or lesbian, but I'm non-binary." And it's not them saying I don't think that they're going through something real there. I'm saying that just pragmatically, if you've got armies of these kids coming out in schools, it is scaring the parents. And it's really easy for me to understand how some of these things have been done in a way that I don't think is skillful, and it's just giving the Republicans ammunition to go after us. So, when I'm saying stuff on Twitter kind of urging us to back away from this progressive fringe, it's not because I don't love trans people or I don't see the humanity there. It's because I don't think these tactics are going to get us the things that we want. And all of us on this call today, I think we all 10 out of 10 want dignity for trans people. Isn't that right?
Absolutely. And I think you're hitting on something really important, which is this sort of distinction between like a lifestyle minority or like a medical minority. And like, I believe very strongly that if you want to wear like women's clothing and you just want to like cross dress, like you should be able to do that. And you should be able to wear your drag, and you should be able to like identify as non-binary, and whatever that means to you. I think it's like so fundamental to your right as an American that you be able to express that. At the same time, I think that there's like a sort of conflation here where like maybe these children in these classes who are all raising their hands and saying that they're non-binary, they probably are like expressing a real sentiment, which is like the desire for gender nonconformity or fluidity. And it's like, it's very, it's okay if children are able to explore that. I think the problem, we've sent like mixed messages. And one of those messages is that it's like totally that we need to transition because there's a medical need. And so like plastic, when you're talking about like, I would kill myself if I wasn't able to transition. That is an intense need, which goes so far beyond just, like I like the color green, right? I'm wearing a green dress. That's not a strong need, right? At the end of the day, I don't think that I have like a medical like right to wear the color green. I think I have a personal freedom of expression right to do that. And I think that when we make arguments for like trans people getting surgeries in prison, for example, that's a medical need argument, right? And we can defend trans rights on that. But if we're going to do that, then we need to make a distinction for these kids that are raising their hand. Otherwise, people are going to see them and they're thinking that like, oh, progressives want to like give these kids surgery. And we just have to be able to show that like both things are fine, but they are different things that we're talking about here.
I do feel like they have completely blown out of proportion the whole like kids are being confused by this thing. I think that is a tool that the Republicans have used.
It's exaggerated for sure.
It is.
When I was a kid, one of the most euphoric feelings I remember was in high school. I had this one teacher who said to me day one, "What are your pronouns?" And I was looking at him like in my head. I'm like, "What the fuck are you talking about?" Like, because the school was just, they, misgendered me in the yearbook. They, were refused to call me she, her. They were just horrible. And this one teacher was like, "What do you want to be called?" And I said, she, her. And I didn't even know that was like an option in the school. And he addressed the entire class and explained to them what transgender meant and that I am to be called she, her. And you know how many kids in that class transitioned other than me?
Zero, yeah.
None of them.
Well, no, I was just saying that probably, I'm assuming that maybe made you feel like an outcast, or did that make you feel uncomfortable at all?
No, it made me feel so seen. And it made me feel safe because I was like, this teacher has my back now. And now if any of the kids in class bullied me or were like, you're a boy, like I would go to him and he would address it. And I was like, I just felt so safe in his class, whereas the other classes, it was bullying me was excused.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I even had teachers that would write notes when they would have substitute teachers. On the notes, they would say that they would use my name, was to be called by this name, my legal name, and do not call me she, her.
Yeah.
So it was just like that class I didn't feel safe in versus this class where this teacher was like, I see you. Who do you want to be? And it was like, that was amazing.
Well, that's so much like what you're talking about with your mother too.
Yeah.
The power of having someone step in and have your back.
Yes.
And it doesn't even need to be like an institutional thing, like,
right.
Where like the school itself is having like a rule in place, but just having one person to like have your back on that, that's so valuable. And, I think we've talked about this so many times on this show, but kind of like there's cultural differences between conservatives and liberals. One of those cultural differences, I grew up in like a rural town, like lots of conservatives. One of the cultural elements of that is the idea that you stand up for yourself, or like you get other people to stand up for you, but you don't rely on like the government or like the policy to protect you. And that kind of works when you're in this small town and you have these personal relationships and like you can really connect with people. But it's way harder to do when you're navigating these sort of impersonal environments where like you might not have those connections. And so I think that like liberals and progressives, they're way more likely to advocate for like an actual policy, something in Title IX or, in somewhere else in the law that says, no, you can't discriminate. And so I think that we're like butting heads culturally where conservatives are like, why do you need to do that? Like just, speak to people. Yeah. And it's different approaches that work, more or less in different areas.
I mean, I hear you, Taf. I remember though, like we had one Black girl that came and enrolled in my Mississippi private school when I was young. And I'll never forget the day she got stabbed in the eye with a pencil.
Holy fuck.
And, she left school after that and I never saw her again. I think that regulation can like have its place. Where I really differ from this.
To stab people in the eye with pencils. Yeah. Totally agree. It's like a bare minimum regulation.
It was an accident, but we don't know if it was racially motivated or what. My point is, I think that there's this tendency in progressive circles to really inflame and just like poke the conservatives as hard as you can and push it. It's where this drag queen story hour comes from. I think the pretext with this is, oh, we're going to educate children about gender diversity. I think the subtext of it really is, F you conservatives, look at these drag queens out here. We're proud, we're queer.
Right.
It's just kind of a like staking a cultural stake in the ground. Yeah, I don't have a problem with that. It's like there's a cost to this because they're going to retaliate and they're going to backfire. And the last thing I want to say, plastic, and this is respectfully, I don't agree with you that like no kids are going to transition. It's a real public policy problem nowadays. The number of girls that are detransitioning, they're getting on this, and we actually don't have full numbers because these clinics will not release their total data to the public. I think directionally, if you look at these stories, for whatever reason, female to males, they are detransitioning at rates that are different than us. We do this. We tend to not have regrets. We are relatively low with detransitioners, but this is a public policy problem. And I think like mixing non-binary and FTMs and MTFs into this like gender soup, I think it's really not serving us from a public policy perspective.
I think, again, checks and balances, but completely villainizing trans kids and
100%.
Not allowed. Again, that's going to lead to more suicides for trans
100%.
kids because there are trans kids. So just because the detransition rate is increased in trans boys, that doesn't mean that the I hate using the term real trans, but the real trans boys suffer.
Yeah.
Because if these rules were in place when I was a kid, I would not be here today. So I think we need to have stricter rules, but not rules that erase trans kids.
I 100% with you.
Sure.
Go, Scott.
Okay, yeah. Sorry, I'll just jump in. I so agree with what you're saying there, Plastic. Like, I think the like unifying force here is that we recognize that males and females respond to different things. And it's like one of the things I've seen is that like females can tend to have more of like a social connection to how they make their decisions and their identities. And this can feed into some of the like problems of like trying to escape like sexualization when they're going through puberty or something. And then they take on this trans identity, go a little too far, and then they detransition. And it's like, that's the issue, is like, we got to start treating cases individually, like how they are, and recognize, like you said, there needs to be a pipeline or some kind of gateway or pathway really for trans kids, for youth that are in this space, know themselves and are questioning their gender and saying like, I think this might be me. Like, can I get some help? And there should be a way for them to proceed in a supportive environment. And that's what, like, I think what we're all coming towards is like a solution for better medical care. And that's what we're really like trying to look for in this. And it's just a matter of figuring out, what does that exactly look like?
Yeah. And listen, I mean, even among cis children, gender role playing when you're a child is normal.
Oh, 100%.
Yes.
People forget that. I know so many of my cisgender friends who were role playing with gender when they were kids, and they are completely like, there was one little girl that was on my block who I was sure was going to either grow up to be trans or a lesbian, and she is married with children now, and it was like she was just exploring,
Yeah, and most kids are out of it.
Yeah.
And I think, again, making children feel like something is wrong with them for questioning their gender is wrong.
Oh,
and
100%.
I think that when I was a kid and I was trans, the checks and balances that were in place worked for me. I went to the doctor, I talked to therapists, I spoke to my mom. I think it's also important that we start to educate parents more, because I think parents are the ones who are punishing their children for this. And I think the parents need the education more than the kids need the education. I think I forgot who it was that said that you think that a lot of the stuff that's being taught in school now, or like is happening in schools, is pushback against the conservatives. I do agree to some extent, because like, I feel like it's important to teach kids tolerance. Some of the stuff is going a little over the top with some of these things about like, coming out day for like whatever, like middle schoolers.
Maybe a bit much.
Yeah.
A little much.
It's ridiculous.
Do you think that has anything to do with the amount of detransitioners we're seeing? Just because like, I feel like, nowadays, because it's taught to them what being trans is, what being non-binary is, in the name of creating tolerance, do you think that's just maybe making some kids think they're trans and then they go through a transition and then go, oh shit, this wasn't meant for me?
I think the terms are not clear among people. I think there's a lot of new terms coming in that are confusing people. Like, I don't know, for instance, like when I was a kid, there was a period in my life, in my childhood, where I probably would have been considered non-binary, but I didn't have that term then. So I would go around saying I was genderless because I didn't quite feel I was a boy. I knew I wasn't a boy, but I didn't quite feel comfortable claiming I was a girl in middle school. But I think that being non-binary is this great little purgatory that a lot of trans people are in the beginning, figuring out who they are, trying on different hats and figuring out, am I a girl? Am I a boy? And that's normal. I think when we get into all of these new terminologies, that it is easy for kids to be like, I'm trans, when they're really not. And again, I think that's when like either having psychiatrists or parents or people talking to their kids about this stuff would be more important than trying to shame them and shut them down.
Yeah, I mean, this is why I believe so strongly in transmedicalism. I'm fully with you. Kids need to be able to play with gender. Like, we just used to call these kids goth back in the 90s, right? So, I think that's beautiful. I love that. And I want every single kid to be able to do that. I think the problem is when we're so quick to medicalize this. Kelly, I've used the talking point that you gave last episode literally 3 times this week talking to elected officials, where you were talking about how, like, when you think a lot of the people that start this, they just want to be able to talk about their feelings. And that makes a lot of sense to me. I'm sure there are a lot of kids that come in there, like you, obviously transitioned, you're gorgeous, you're very feminine. We all went down the right path for us. But I think it's really important to, just to not immediately medicalize and to give those kids, enough time to figure out who they are, to make a decision for them. And Taf, like you were saying, if someone wants to cross-dress, like, more power to you. That's great. If you don't have to get on these hormones and have your face and your genitals taken apart, like, I think that's a good decision for you.
Yeah.
Do you not think there's a place to, sorry, I was just going to ask, do you not think there's like any room for maybe, quote unquote, I hate phrasing it this way, but setting a kid on the right path before they get into like cross-dressing, like maybe being like, oh, maybe, boys don't wear dresses, and maybe for a while trying to like say that they can't do that stuff. And if it is consistent, then maybe allowing them to do that. I'm not saying like a full on tell your kid no for the rest of their life, but maybe just try to set them straight before they have to go down this trans path or cross-dressing path, because it's not like an easy life, I
feel like, again, that is the parent trying to, in a sense, make that kid in their vision. If your kid is showing signs of gender diversity or whatever, and you're trying to stop that, I feel like, again, that's the parent trying to prevent that child from being their true self. My mom, when I was young, for instance, I wanted to go to school in a dress, and she gave me the option. She said, you could go to school in the dress and kids may make fun of you, or you could dress like a boy, and when you come home, you can put the dress on and be safe here. And she gave me that choice. And I said, fuck the kids, I'm wearing the dress. And I went to dress. But I think giving the kids that option, instead of phrasing it like boys don't wear dresses, I feel like you should instead phrase it like, people, let them know the truth of what will happen if you go out dressed as a girl and you're a boy. People may make fun of you. You may be called names. Is that something that you want to do? And give them the choice, but rather to tell them that they're wrong for that, I feel like puts it in their head that there's something wrong with them. I
feel like all of us probably, when we were younger, probably experimented with gender and really got that message right away that it was wrong, and we were punished, or at least I did. Like, I will never forget when I started, like, my parents obviously physically punished me in some really difficult ways, like when I would, experiment with gender. And then I remember I would try to turn things into accessories, right? And my dad would just hit the roof and start screaming at me about that, because it looked gay, right? So I don't know if there's like a danger, Kelly, of like the kid not getting the message that this stuff is that this is what boys do, or maybe I'm naive about that. I don't know.
Well, I don't know if I just see like too much like conservative media on my page, but like a lot of people would say that like, oh, you're grooming your child if you allow them to wear a dress. Or
how is it not grooming if your child wants to wear a dress and you tell them no? That's also grooming. You know what I mean? I feel like I start listening to the child more and seeing who this person wants to be. Kids are not stupid. I'm like so sick of people acting like kids are dumb and that they're too young to know. Kids know who they are. And we all try on. Cis, trans, doesn't matter. We all go through different phases in our life. Allow that child to express themselves and guide them through that, protecting them, but don't limit them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I feel like it's so hard because it's like, how do you tell based on those types of things we were talking about, like wearing dresses? How do you know that child wants to actually transition or is just going to grow up and be a regular gay guy? Like, I think there's like experimentation, like we all acknowledge there's experimentation. And I think what it comes down to is like, when I think about it, like, how am I confident that transition was right for me? It was time. I gave myself time and like the feelings did not go away. They were persistent. And that was what kind of informed me like, hey, this isn't going to change for me. I need to make a decision on how I want to set up my life for like the rest of my future. Do I want to be a depressed man or do I want to like be the woman that I really want to be? And it's like, I needed time to figure that out. And it's like, what we want to do is somehow like hit that sweet spot of giving them time and space to figure this out, but also not too much time that they're going through puberty and having all those masculinization effects happen before like they're ready to. So it's a hard balance.
Can I ask a quick question? Was there any point where any of us, like at any age, if someone said, hey, you can be a girl, you would not have just said, yes, absolutely? I mean, would y'all have had to think about it? Because I wouldn't have.
No.
Yeah, not me.
I grew up in a conservative household, so.
I think, Sky, what about you?
I would have thought about it. Like, if I'm being perfectly honest, yeah. Like, I didn't know. I wasn't fully confident in that decision because I didn't know what life would look like exactly as a woman. I needed to like approach it in parts, especially because like, I don't think HRT or like transition is necessarily an all things equal path. Like, I think there's risks to long-term hormone usage that we may not know all about, but it's like, I just don't really think you can look at transition as like an all things equal decision.
But did you know that at 5 years old though?
Sure, if someone said like press a button and you turn into a girl, what would you say?
5 years old.
Oh my gosh. Okay. Well, this hypothetical, like,
like
sure, with no consequences, but like, that's not life. Like,
but you don't know.
No, it's not life.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think I get the hypothetical, I think, which is just like, what was your natural impulse towards? And, did that turn out to be correct? Though, and Kelly's talking about this like grooming thing. And I think the problem here is really just that there's really mixed messages from the sort of progressive trans side, where, again, like, I think kids should be able to, express themselves and experiment and do those things. And I don't think that necessarily we have to like put them on a medical path as a result of that, right? I think you can just experiment without going down the medical route. And one of the problems is that one of the ways we've advocated for ourselves is by saying like, I don't know if you've had this experience. I had this experience where I was a gender nonconforming kid. I came out to my mom and I had months and months of conversations with her where I would go to her and I would make these appeals based on science. And I would tell her, listen, this is what the studies say. Like, it's really going to work out for me. And I did that for months. And it wasn't until I like broke down crying in front of her and showed the depth of my emotion on the issue that she really was able to connect with me. And we made plans to drive 6 hours out to, a city where they'd have an endocrinologist that could work with me. And that was so important for me to advocate for myself. Yeah. But I also recognize that in advocating for ourselves, sometimes we create this impression that if any kid has like gender nonconforming behavior, that means that we need to like get them on this path to medicalization. And that's just not necessarily true. It needs to be handled delicately. And I think that the reason conservatives feel like it's grooming is because a lot of people aren't willing to acknowledge that like sometimes you might want to transition when you're like a kid because you don't fully understand what that means. And then you change your mind as like an adolescent. that wasn't the case for me. Maybe that's not the case for most people, but it's important that at the very least we have like an expert, a doctor who is experienced in this to help give guidance, and frankly, to feel like they can help give that guidance without having the political pressure from their peers to just like sign off on everything. And so that is so hard to get, but it needs to happen. And as soon as we have that, I think it's going to be so much easier to just say like, yeah, kids can experiment with gender, totally fine, because that doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be put on a medical path, and we can trust the system to make the right decision.
But I think where the issue comes in and why some people call it grooming is because do you not think allowing that experimentation could eventually lead down to a medical path in the future, whereas it wouldn't have before?
Apologies. We'll edit this out.
I'll totally edit. No, I'm going to keep it right there. We're just going to slow mo. Reading that orange. It's going to be beautiful.
Yeah. No, I mean, I don't think so. I think it's unlikely that if you let a kid, play with their gender, wear different clothes, that's going to necessarily mean that they get on this medical path. I think that if you talk to a doctor, I think you start putting them on this medical path. And I think sometimes the messaging from the community is not very helpful, especially if the kid is having doubts. A lot of times the message from the trans community is just like transition harder. It's like get more surgeries. And that might not be helpful for someone who really is having doubts and doesn't understand that it's totally fine to have experimented and to decide it's not for you. That's also okay. It's okay if someone wants to detransition. And I think some people even feel like they're locked into transition because, they've made all these arguments, they've put in all this work, they've demanded everyone around them change their pronouns. And now they're like, oh no, if I go back on this, I'm going to look like a fool and I might hurt other trans people.
Right.
That shouldn't be the case. You should be able to.
Don't you think some of that though, Taf, is this Trump University scheme that came out? Everyone that went to Trump University said initially oh, it was the best thing I ever did. I got so much value out of it. And then the lawsuit comes and these same people are testifying yeah, it was a scam. I think there's a cost fallacy with a lot of trans people. Especially that one dude that got a vaginoplasty and then decided to detransition.
So tragic.
Got a lot of sunk cost at that point, dude. So I agree with you 100% in there. We need more room in our community for people that detransition. Not everyone that does this automatically becomes a Chloe Cole and a grifter trying to hurt our rights. That's not the case.
And we need to be able to platform these people without having them run straight into the arms 100%. Of the craziest gender critical person who is just going to give them a microphone.
Yes.
We actually have to have conversations about this and not just shun these people.
100%. Plastic, how do you feel?
Yeah.
About which part on that?
Yeah.
Just jump on in.
Well, so I'm still in my head on the on trans kids because again, I think that it's really important to also, because each trans person's journey is unique to them, and I've had two really close friends of mine that have detransitioned, and both of them ended up transitioning back to female.
Oh, wow.
They were assigned male at birth, transitioned to female, and then mid-transition transitioned back to male, and then transitioned back to female again, and now are completely happy as female. And the thing with that is that a lot of both of their backgrounds were conservative families were shaming them. So that was what was responsible for their detransition. And I think that we're not crediting that enough. I feel like we see detransition stories and we're like, oh, they immediately regretted it. We're not thinking about their home life and who was whispering in their ear and the fact that it was conservative rhetoric that was shaming them. I do feel that, yes, in some instances that it's probably best that we maybe set, like I said, stricter rules or checks and balances for kids going on the medical path. But also, I don't feel like we should be able to overstep that. I think that's something that should be between the trans child, the parent, and the doctors. Because for me, I'm glad personally that I didn't go on hormones super young because I ended up getting the vaginoplasty, and I had a lot to work with, and I made my results much better. And it made my
Same. Yes.
Congratulations.
Very happy
Yeah,
with
congrats.
Whereas like there are other people who went on very young and did not have a lot of growth, and it made their surgery much more difficult. So there are pros and cons to both.
Yeah.
Again, I wouldn't want somebody to tell that person though, no, you can't do that because I didn't do it and I don't think it was right. Like, you know what I mean? I feel like we're overstepping a lot here by feeling that we have the right to decide for other trans people how they transition.
Yeah. It's just, oh God, I gotta start a little bit of a public fight today. I agree with you that that's a huge portion of it, but I also think some of these detransitioners, I think they're crossies that find out they just don't like the effects of hormones in their body. Like take Ray GP. I'm sorry. That dude is the most obvious crossy, like transvestic crossdresser on the entire planet. Like he says he's on estrogen forever. It's like, what, 2 milligrams or something? So you can make sure to like jack off the entire time. Like, come on, some of these people get on HRT and it's distressing for them because it's about like sex. It's not about their identity. And that's okay. If you want to go be a crossy, more power to you. But I mean, like, I don't think it's all just conservatives. I think some people go down this path of finding out if there's like a woman inside, and there's just not. And that's okay. Like, they should be able to go back.
There's a lot of fetishizing it.
Yeah, 100%.
I do see that a lot too. And that is like, I'm able to clock that immediately. And I do have an issue with that because it's like, bitch, don't be trying to get in my circle.
100%.
But I think, again, like we need to, that comes in with the checks and balances of like, we need to set clear, concise rules and boundaries in the trans community that protect trans people and also protect non-trans people. And hopefully we could get to that point.
So true, Queen. I agree. Yeah.
I mean, yeah, and not necessarily to like muddy the waters, but I think that it's complicated too. Like you could have people that there is a sexuality that goes with their transition, but it's not the motivator. It's not why. There's a conflict born out of it. I mean, that connects to my experience. Like I definitely would say, like for me, like I have some of that autosexuality, but that's not why I transitioned. I transitioned because I couldn't be happy as a man, as a male in society. And it's like, does that mean like, because I share some similarities to Ray GP that I couldn't transition? No, it just means that there should be standards, gatekeeping, just like we're saying, but I'm just trying to, build on that standard and say like, there's a lot of nuances and individual components that go into transition. And I think the bottom line that we're all reaching here is that there needs to be some criteria and time to figure those things out and to like work with that individual to really assess, hey, do you want to be a woman at 30, 40, 50 years old? Because this stays with you. You do this and it's a direction you're moving in your life. True. And you got to be signing up for a lot more than, I don't know, some short-term sexual fulfillment or whatever, is motivating some of this, group. And so it's like, I just think better therapy and more knowledge on the effects are really what like need to be proliferated and understood so that we don't have, like you all mentioned, certain detransitioners that, platform and then speak out against it. I mean, I saw this firsthand at the GenSpec conference that I went to that was like, Chloe Cole, actually, she wasn't there. I don't think she was there. But like other detransitioners were there. Prisha was there, a different one. And it's just like, when you see the harm on them, like they clearly weren't good candidates, but they were pushed in this direction. So there needs to be some reforms. And so I'm kind of sympathetic to what they're saying. I just want to make sure we minimize the collateral damage as these voices come forward and that, we see that transition does work for some. It's just a matter of figuring out who that is and understanding like, in an individualized approach, how to help that person arrive to that conclusion.
Schyler, Donald Trump gets elected. He creates the perfect trans policy, fixes the economy, deports all illegal immigrants. This is your dream. What's your ideal if Trump gets elected?
Oh God. I don't know. I mean, it's definitely, I'm not concerned about immigration. Like illegal immigrants aren't a problem for me.
Okay.
That's not a problem for me.
I got a problem with that.
I don't have anything to really speak on there. I just don't have a lot of knowledge on that.
Yeah.
But when it comes to I guess trans rights, I would like to see a sort of a return to kind of what things used to sort of be. And so what I mean by that is not all the way, but partially back from funneling trans women into women's prisons that aren't transitioned or convicted with sexual, issues. And then things like that. I don't want to see that happening because I think that's where things are kind of rubbing up against, the political or the society's viewpoint of trans people. And so
in terms of weighing the sort of trans stuff that I know we've talked a lot about versus all of the other issues going into the election, would you say in general you find Donald Trump's, stated positions, it's we can get into it. I don't know how much of his stated positions he truly believes in or is going to enact. But, you're weighing these. Are you really seeing the rest of his positions as being maybe good, maybe bad, or are there some that you are generally in favor of? How does that weigh out? How do you do that?
I'm not a political person. I honestly I'm still on the fence, to be honest. I'm going to decide the day of, but I think for me, it's just, short answer is no. I don't really like his personality. Like I mentioned, I voted for Biden in the last election. It's just that I'm worried about the continual swing of progressivism for 4 more years. I just think there's a pendulum here, and I want to have some pushback on that direction so that the end result of the blowback isn't so bad. Because I see the direction, with detransitioners and those types of things, and I get a little concerned.
I hear you, and again, we're gonna be friends no matter what. Even though Kamala's my girl. But
don't kick me off Dollcast.
No. I love you too much, Scott.
Kamala's definitely hotter. I
really feel where you're coming from with that. This is my problem with Trump, though. Is he's not a policy guy. Let's take something you said that I agree with, which is that our border is a serious problem. I'm not coming at this from a xenophobic perspective. It's 100% a national security perspective. Down there on the southern border, we've got so many crossings a day. The asylum system is clearly broken. We don't know who's coming into the country. One of the stories we've just forgotten to memory hold from the Bush era is someone coming into the United States with a dirty bomb with the intention of attacking us and, basically spreading radiological material in one of our major cities. So I'm really sympathetic from a NatSec perspective to this goal of fixing the border. My problem with Donald Trump is nothing he plans to do from a policy perspective will actually address that. What is the reason the border is broken? It's because we don't have enough judges. The judges here in Massachusetts have actually been dispatched down to the southern border to help adjudicate some of these cases as they're coming through. Donald Trump doesn't want to do that. He wants to build a wall from sea to shining sea, right? So the problem over and over again is this is my job, and I do know a thing or two about this. And when it comes to the economy, his plan for the economy last time was one of the reasons inflation got so high, just unchecked spending, deficit skyrocketing, basically shooting bazookas of cash at the stock market. There are so many people that made tons of money by just following whatever the Fed was investing their money in during COVID because they were shooting so much cash there. You couldn't help but get very, very rich doing it. So it's just every single strategy he tries to implement, it doesn't seem like it's skillfully done. I'm with you on being frustrated with a lot of the progressive excesses, but it just seems like there's a real competence issue that goes along with getting the Republicans into government. And that's what pushes me away.
Can I ask you something?
Yeah, of course.
It sounds like on the issue of protectionism, you see some value in manufacturing home. On the issue of the border, you see a real security issue with illegal immigrants and our broken asylum system, which is costing us lots of money, hurting actual real asylum seekers because we can't process all of these people fast enough. You have these worries about the excesses of the progressive movement. But at the end of the day, your feeling is that like Trump, he's just not a policy guy, and like this is all kind of lip service. I think like the fact that it's all kind of lip service is the only reason to consider Trump.
Really?
I mean,
that's very smart, actually. Yeah.
Because, okay, I'm going to annoy all like the Trumples. Trump appeals to like a lot of fucking idiots who like don't understand anything about politics and who are like, big, beautiful wall. That sounds amazing. Like that's going to protect us. They like imagine him like walking into like a boardroom with like Putin and Xi and just like slapping his like fat orange cock on the table. And suddenly, American foreign policy is solved. In reality, that doesn't happen. And also in reality, like when candidates run on these sort of arguments, then they get into office and then they are much more responsive to wealthier donors, people who are more educated, people who are actually writing policy. I think that you can sort of see that there's a political meta which has developed where like the Republican Party is willing to run this candidate who is he's like narcissistic. I don't know if he really has like any deep values besides personal self-aggrandizement, but he gets votes. And the Republicans who are powerful and who have money understand that if Trump gets into office, this guy who doesn't really have a ton of strong opinions of his own is going to be able to sign off on policy that they've carefully crafted.
Yeah,
and so I think
this is what crypto wants to do. They're a perfect example.
This
The
is
entire
what
crypto industry
Elon
wants to do it 100%.
And I think if you look at his presidency, in 2016, I think that that's what you see for the most part. Like you're right. He was inflationary, and I certainly cannot give him credit for that. But a lot of his strategy came from basically Republican operatives who are a lot smarter than he is and told him like, appoint these judges. They'll rule on Chevron. They'll rule on, Roe. And suddenly the Republicans are winning these victories. I think that if your number one issue with Trump is like, he's not a policy guy, I think maybe that's not so important. And maybe it's more important that you care about the immigration and the protectionism and, the excesses of progressivism. Honestly, if I were in your position, I would let that weigh more on me.
The last time around, like, what was he effective on? What was Trump's really, like, let's look at just policy to policy. What does Biden have? He's got Inflation Reduction Act. That was effective. CHIPS was effective for getting stuff back here domestically. We lowered inflation faster than any other country in the world. I think that when it came to like the war, supporting Ukraine, A+ for that. Rolling out the vaccine, A+ for that. Supporting Israel, I'll give him a C+. Like there's solid like policy accomplishments there. When I look at Trump, I mean, like I don't mean this snarkily. What can you point to as an accomplishment of his presidency? Warp speed. My husband works in this industry. That money was allocated far before he got into office. If I thought he deserved credit for all of that, I would give it to him. I don't think it's fair. Like Frank worked on the Moderna portion of that. Like this was 10 years in development ahead of that. So like what is the policy that he accomplished last time around?
Yeah, I don't know if I would say there's like a ton. I think, like you already mentioned, I think there's prison reform. I think that
prison reform, that's fair. Yeah.
I think that if you are a big fan of Donald Trump, you'll probably point to the fact that you had like lower border crossings.
Fair.
He can like take credit for that is maybe questionable. I think you would point to the fact that there was so much inflation towards the latter half of his presidency as being a COVID thing, or towards the very end of it. I think you would say it's just like a COVID thing, and there wasn't much way of getting out of that. I think they would point to the fact that, like it or not, there were no new wars. And maybe if a war in Ukraine had broken out, I think I would have loved Donald Trump to make the same policy decisions that Biden did, because frankly, the Biden administration handled Ukraine extremely well, being able to utilize old technology to massively slow down and cost one of our biggest geopolitical rivals tons of money, probably slow down the invasion of Taiwan. Fantastic. I think maybe if you do care a lot about Israel, Trump is a lot more muscular on Israel than Kamala Harris. And so I don't know. I think it's interesting that between you and Schyler, you have this sort of duality where one person is like, I'm not super interested in the policy, but like, I just think it's going to be a cultural change. And then Brianna, you're like, I'm only interested in what he says policy-wise. But it seems like you might align on him, at least in a perfect world.
Oh, of course I do.
And I'll say too,
election denialism, really bad.
Yeah, we haven't even
That's my number one thing.
Yeah.
play against Donald Trump. I did not like his trans ban in the military.
Nope.
That whole thing.
There you go.
Because so I was kind of okay with it until I found out that it was all unilateral across the board. I thought it was just combat, but it was non-combat and combat. So even intelligence roles that had zero impact of being on medication or whatever are impacted now. And it's I don't really want to see that, but it's what am I left? This is where I really just don't like the two-party system. My real problems lie more with the structure of our politics than it has to do that produces these, these candidates. It's that's where I'm just and I think we can all agree on that. Neither of these candidates are perfect. And it's I feel like this is the, lesser of two evils type of thing again. And it's I don't know. It's I will say too, the other thing that has me going for Kamala is that it looks like the House and the Senate are projected to be Republican, which makes me scared if, it's all Republican.
A lot of legislation. Yeah.
Yes. And he already signed the most executive orders. I forget how many it was, but it was an insane
and they have the Supreme
number.
Court. So.
Can you imagine a Supreme Court that was more against this? Hey, I want plastic and calories.
Yeah, we need
yes.
Well, I'm 1,050 bajillion% against Trump winning.
Girl,
wait, hold on, I'm writing this down. The number 1,015 billion%. Okay, we've got
My ass will be out of the country before January when okay. That happens.
But you're Jewish. You can move to Israel. Can I come room with you for the trans apocalypse? I don't understand. I know that a few of you are considering Trump, but I just don't understand how. I mean, he's so transparent and clear of how he will dismantle this country, and there is no benefit to it. There really isn't. He's going to destroy the economy. He's going to take away trans rights. He's going to undo gay rights. He's going to take away all women's rights that they already have. Roe is just the tip of the iceberg for that one. I mean, why would we want to even entertain that? He's even said day one he will be a dictator. Again, 4 years of Kamala is a small price to pay for another free and fair election rather than a dictatorship that you will just be. I mean, again, look at Nazi Germany. Did we forget about this? Do we really need a reminder of this? This is what dictatorship looks like. And even earlier, we were talking about that stupid anti-trans commercial. That's propaganda. That's what Hitler did with the Jews. This is what he's doing with trans people. We are the current target that he's using to manipulate his dumbass followers to vote for him. We are the big bad wolf that he's created. And that's what Hitler did with the Jews. We are the vermin poisoning the country. He's using the same terminology that Hitler used. And I am sorry, I just don't see a world where even if he had one policy that was a pro, voting for a Hitler wannabe. Yeah. He idolizes people like Putin. He idolizes Hitler. And his entire fan base pretty much is waving a giant fucking swastika. And then there's people who are like, well, I just don't know. I don't know. I think he might be good. Really? Because as a Jew who understands history, I don't think he will be good. And I know for a fact that all women and trans people and gay people and black people and Jews and whoever is not Christian, white, cisgender, hetero male will be royally fucked if he gets in office. And so will the entirety of our country, and not just our country, but the world, because he will be teaming up with the other dictator fascist nut jobs in this world, and they will essentially take over and invade. And they're power hungry. They will stop.
Apocalyptic sounds like
it will be the end.
He does seem to have an alliance with authoritarians that I find really, really disturbing. Yeah. Kelly, you haven't talked for a while. I want you to jump in. What do you think, girl?
Yeah. I mean, it's tough for me just because I feel like you guys are so much more educated on politics and all like this lingo. And like half the time it just sounds like mumbo jumbo to me. It kind of like on a lot of stuff that Plastic was sitting on, just like it's the very basic understandings that I have when it comes to like women's rights and Roe versus Wade. And just like how a lot of the way Trump talks about trans people does kind of remind me of Hitler. And I can just see the hatred growing more and more in this country and just not feeling safe when I leave the house half the time. So to me, I'm just voting for the person that it stands for democracy and seems like they stand for what I think America should stand for. So yeah, that's just where I'm at. I don't, when you guys go into like details about like policies and like the Senate and stuff, like I have no idea half the time. But honestly though, I feel like I kind of represent a majority of Americans because I think a lot of Americans are like me. Like we don't really know the in-depths of like this stuff. It's kind of just like we know what we see on TV, we know what we read on Twitter, and that's kind of how people are voting, I think.
Yeah, I mean, there's this thing that's like, I can't remember where I heard this, but politics takes place locally. Like what you see around you, who your friends are, and what you like come into contact with, like that your world shapes a lot of like how you think about this. So like I live in like conservative land in Virginia, and it's like I get a lot of like disproportionately biased information from that direction. And so it's like I in my view, like if it wasn't for Bree, I would think that Trump is going to just win in a landslide. And I'm kind of glad that it's more like even, because I'm like, I mean, I'm not even sure about Trump either. And like hearing Plastic talk, it's like, you know, it is compelling to be like, yeah, maybe, you know, Kamala is the way forward here. And I've just, you know, been looking at the wrong things. I don't know. And there's just, I'm always an open book, and I appreciate hearing all these perspectives.
Can I ask a really honest question, Sky? And again, like we're friends no matter what, but like January 6th, how do you feel about that? Because this was like January 6th happened. I just worked the presidential election and then exhausted. I just worked the Georgia, both the Senate races. I was so tired. I was so grouchy. And then the Republicans led an insurrection against the Capitol. I sat there and just wept openly that day. And I think, like, you know me well enough to know I'm not some crazy anti-Republican extremist here. My job requires me to work with the left and the right, depending on who contracts me out. And, you know, I treasure constructive relationships with Republicans. But for anyone that's just an American, that was such an incredibly dark day to see people invading our capitals with zip ties, like planning to kidnap members of Congress and deny the election. I mean, how does that make you feel? Because I agree with Plastic. I think the Republicans will try that again and be successful this time, in my view.
Well, I guess, you know, I mean, hard to answer that because, you know, I have no connection to, and I don't know anyone that was part of those riots or anything like that. But I kind of view it as more of a broader trend of radicalization that's happening in all sorts of spaces in our country. It's not like this is a Republican specific phenomenon. It was that day, but there have been far left radical things that have happened. I mean, you have radical groups on both sides, Proud Boys, Antifa, whatever. I mean, there's like, it's just where you are. And I will admit, like, yeah, that was a pretty depressing day for, I think most Americans saw that and were like, yeah, we condemn that. But again, it, you know, you're not there, you're not prepared for it. All you're, you know, you're watching it from wherever you are and you're like, oh gosh, like what's happening to our country? What is disappointing is that Trump didn't speak out more openly against it. I'm absolutely there with you all, but it's like, what we really need is to return to civility and dialogue and having open conversations about these things and make politics discussable again, because quite frankly, I'm scared to talk about it anywhere I go. And it's like, that's not a good thing. That's not the kind of culture you want here. And so
Schyler,
that's the kind of culture that Trump is grooming us for, because he's even come out and said that he will punish at lengths that have never been seen before, his words, anybody who was against him. And that goes for all the Democrat politicians and people in Senate and anybody who voted against him. he will come down on and either arrest them, have them executed, whatever. He even used inflammatory language the other day, threatening to kill Liz Cheney. Like the things he's saying, just you cannot have somebody that disgusting and psychotic in power.
He's constantly ratcheting up the inflammatory rhetoric.
Yes, and not just, and we all know that if, God forbid, that piece of shit got in office, he's out. But J.D. Vance will be in power, and J.D. Vance is equally as fucking scary. And yes, you have all these other people under him, and Trump was a genius putting these people in place during his last term. He put people in place that are his little yes men, where he could get anything he wants done, and he will be absolved of any crime. He's a 34-time convicted felon rapist. How can anybody in their right mind be like, you know what, I like him though. He's funny. I think he should run the country. Like, this man is demented and sick and evil. And you may not like Kamala, but again, she's not a horrible person. And 4 years of her being a normal president would be way better than a dictatorship under that son of a bitch.
Well, I heard Trump quoting recently the Alien Enemies Act of 1798, which we know who Trump is. He's not like reading a book and like coming across this like interesting bit of lore. Someone who's told him about this. And basically, Alien Enemies Act of 1798, I believe it's what was used to like intern Japanese people during World War II. And basically, it allows you to say like an ounce of a country is, you know, your enemy. And then you can start targeting people who might be like spies within your country or are going to undermine you domestically.
Yeah.
And that kind of rhetoric also, like, Schyler, I don't know if you know anything about like the false electors scheme, but like it's more than just like violence on the day of January 6th. Donald Trump had been part of a scheme that had been orchestrated since, I think, beginning like before he actually, you know, before election night, November 6th. And it was to be able to send like a group of false electors to potentially install him as president, overriding the will of the people or the will of the government. And that for me is like so horrific, because even if I agree with like certain policies of his, or even if I believe that like if he gets in power, he's ultimately not going to be able to like do or act on the sort of like nonsense things that he says, even if I think he's going to moderate this, there's a level of chaos in Trump that really bothers me. And for me, it is like a matter of stability, where like I would love, you know, my politics are pretty anti-progressive. I would love for there to be a meaningful reform on progressivism. But I think thrusting the potential, at least to thrust the country into total chaos on the whim of like one man, is just beyond the pale. And for me, like, you know, election day, that is the one issue that is weighing on me more than anything else.
I've got two things to say before we close this out. Taf, I've wanted to tell you this whole show, and I love your hair like that. I think it's absolutely gorgeous. Really, really pretty.
Yeah.
B, I just want to note the irony of the woman who is so famous for being like skeptical about democracy. The fact that democracy and the threat of democracy that Trump presents, and that's what gets you on board. I'm happy you're here with us, but I just think that's a little funny.
Well, I can tell you about the psychology behind it. It's really that I like love order, and I like deeply like fear chaos. And, you know, I like you said, lots of criticisms of democracy. I bring them up constantly. At the end of the day, order is just so much more important, and stability. So
amazing.
All
Plastic,
right.
It's been so good to see you today. Thank you. You were the first guest we've ever had on Dollcast.
Well, I'm honored to. Thank you so much for having me.
Can I say you're prettier in person than you are on Twitter?
you are so gorgeous.
It's
Oh my God.
ridiculous.
I was on your Twitter and I was like, what the hell? Yeah.
Thank you. All of you are gorgeous too, and it was wonderful to be here.
Aw.
No, yeah, it's amazing.
Before we go, can I just ask, we're about to do a segment talking about the need for a kinder trans community. Just very briefly, because we're already at an hour and a half. What are kind of your thoughts about the trans community? Does it ever bum you out that we are so mean to each other, for lack of a better word?
Yeah, the trans community is just a total shit show. Everyone's an asshole. I think that we definitely need to be kinder. I've always felt that way. I've never really been like very involved in the trans community growing up. I didn't have a lot of trans friends because of the cattiness. Yeah, the chaos, the cattiness, that like you need to transition this way, you need to do that, you should get the, and it's like, girl, fuck off. So
Yes.
I think that we're getting there. I've actually feel like we are starting to unite more. I don't know if I'm the only one seeing that, but I feel like there is more of like kind of a a little bit more of like a community now than there was.
We want to be a community with you, and you're welcome on the Dollcast anytime.
Well, thank you so much.
Yeah.
For
I'd love to do
sure.
a like more casual episode with you too. One that's like a little less debatey. But like we've got like our third topic is fashion. I feel like
I want to ask about your cheekbones. I want to hold this about your cheekbones. They're
There's so
beautiful.
many
real.
questions. Oh my god.
They look like Victoria Justices. They look so prominent and pretty.
So they're my mommy's cheekbones.
Lovely.
All right. Thank you for coming.
Thank you for
Thank
having me.
you.